You're listening to Data Plus Love. I'm your host, Zach Bowders, and I'm here today with Ann K. Emery, the leader of Depict Data Studio. Ann is a Dataviz speaker and designer, and you've probably seen her all over Twitter with her helpful videos. How are you today, Ann?
I'm great. How are you, Zach?
I'm great. It's just a pleasure to be speaking with you. I've sort of stalked you on Twitter for a little while, like in a non-creepy way, in a I like your posts way. So it's really exciting to be talking with you because one of the things that I always hope to do with this podcast is sort of extend the friendships that you sort of gather at work events and conferences when you just have those casual conversations about work chit chat. So it's exciting to be talking with you, especially since you do something so different than what I do, which is teaching. And I really appreciate that.
Well, it's great to be talking with you because you may have stalked me on Twitter, but I have stalked your podcast for the past month. I think I listened to 4 episodes today alone. I consume a lot of podcasts, but I really like yours. I knew that I'll stop sucking up in a moment, I promise. But I knew when I heard your intro music, I was like, Zach and I are going to be friends. I know we are. I know we're going to hit it off.
Okay, so behind the scenes, planning a podcast, there's a lot of considerations, figuring out how to edit audio, what's your format going to be, and your intro music, intro, outro. So I went through like 150 tracks to find a track that I really wanted to use for that music. There was another choice that was better, but I wasn't going to pay $15 a month for it. This is free as long as I'm not getting paid for this podcast, and I'm definitely not getting paid for it. But having said that, I had some friends preview the podcast, and they're like, I don't know, like 30 seconds worth of bumper music's a little self-indulgent. And I'm like, just wait for it. People are going to like this, or at least I'm going to like it. Like, I'm going to listen to it. And then other people, there's the handy skip button in whatever podcast app you're using. So, be liberal with the skip button if you don't like the music, because I'm not changing it.
No, you had a really good quote. It was like something you learned from Mike Cisneros, where it's like you don't have to be for everyone. Be like
Yeah.
yourself for some people. And it resonated with me. So keep doing what you're doing. You're on a roll.
And my listener numbers prove that, because I am definitely not 500 people's favorite things. I am like a little more than 9 people's favorite things. No, the podcast is doing pretty well, actually. I have about 4,000 downloads at this point, and we launched January 1st. So this is, I think, going to be about our 20th episode, because I've hit every other Wednesday all year so far. So it has gotten to the point where it is happening automatically. Editing's a lot easier. The hardest part is booking, as I've said before, because it's not fun to ask people, because, you're imposing on them. And also it's kind of like, it's that sort of, you're definitely asking a favor, but it's almost like a date in an awkward way, because there's that sense of like, I don't know, I'm kind of busy with work right now. Like, maybe after the new fiscal year. And you're like, yeah, okay, sure. That sounds good.
Well, as long as we're sharing behind the scenes tips, you have to tell people what time we're recording this at, because I think that's a really interesting angle of just the logistics of how you make all this work.
So I'm recording this at 8 p.m. Central. For Ann, it's 9 p.m. Eastern. I guess it's actually like 8:20 almost. But yeah, this is usually the time my children are going to bed. Actually, my 9-year-old just got back from dance. So I pulled in. She went in and immediately started throwing a fit with my wife. I walked upstairs, walked back downstairs, said, listen, I know something's going on and I don't know what it is, but I'm about to record a podcast. And unless you want this tantrum immortalized on the internet, you might want to figure it out in the next 4.5 minutes. And then I came back up here. So I haven't heard any more screaming. So either it's become like a Cold War or they worked it out. So it's all great.
I guarantee you that my husband is downstairs with the 4-year-old and 1-year-old giving them candy to keep them quiet, which is going to be fine in the short term. And then in like half an hour when we're done, it's going to backfire and it's going to be like tantrums all over the place. So we'll see. But you know what? That's how you make it work when you both have jobs and you both have kids. It's just like, that's life these days. So
And this is like our professional parent talk segment of this, because so many of my listeners, and I'm sure of your trainees have kids and are professionals. And especially when you're in like a dual income home and both of you are working, you've got all the kids' extracurriculars, you've got your own life, you've got your own personal ambitions, you might have hobbies, you probably don't have friends anymore, and you're trying to balance all of that at once. So yeah, it's you can still do stuff you want. I'm doing a podcast that no one's paying me a dime for. I just do it in the evenings and beg people to be on it. So anything's achievable if you put your mind to it and set the bar just low enough.
Well, okay. So speaking of your podcast, I know you've been having a mix of guests, but now you've started doing solo episodes, or at least solo episode, hopefully plural. Hopefully you're going to do some more. And I really liked the recent solo episode you did where you talked about this distinction between two different roles. Now I'm going to try to remember them. This is my quiz for myself to see how well I was paying attention, but let me know if I'm getting the terms wrong, because I know a little bit about where you work, but I work in totally different settings. I'm in year 7 of working for myself, so I've kind of consulted with a lot of different groups. So I don't know, each organization calls these things a little bit different. But on your episode, you were saying there's this difference between more of a traditional IT role or a software developer versus more of an analyst or a data professional. Are those the terms that you used?
I think you nailed it. That's pretty much it.
I had to re-listen to that like an hour ago. I was like, I think this is right. And you were saying, okay, so the traditional IT role or software developer, they're typically the people that you get these requests in for data. Let's say you're making a dashboard, for example, and some of these requests might be really specific, maybe even so specific as to say, like, we really want to see such and such chart type. We want to see these variables. Sometimes they're really specific, sometimes they're not. And the typical role is like, you just make what they ask for. You just kind of like, you do it, you build it out. And you were saying the data professional, I don't know if you said this or if I imagine this, but like the value add of being a data professional is you kind of read between the lines of what's requested. And then you give them what they actually want and need. Because sometimes let's say it's your boss asking for a dashboard. What they say they want and need is different from what they actually want and need. Like they might say like, I need a bar chart about such and such. And you're like, that's cool. I'll humor you and make that, I guess. But like really your job is to push back a little bit in a polite and professional way, but to push back a little bit and like really listen and ask more questions and get at what do they really need. And you had some good examples of like, people should go back and listen to the full episode, of course, but we'll see if I'm getting the gist of it right. Hopefully this is interesting for you too, to see like how listeners digest the info. You were saying like, ask questions about what the data is going to be used for, what action might be taken on the data, and like, listen and then give them what they really need, which might be a little bit different. How did I do? Did I pass the test? Did I get it right?
I think I need to hire you as like a spokeswoman for me because you say me better than I say me. I think you're dead on with so much of this. And again, we're just repeating things I've said at this point. So I'm just agreeing with me, which is kind of fun. But yeah, as the data professional, a data professional is not to say that you are more skilled than the IT worker. It's not to say one is better than the other, just that they're different roles. So as the data professional, you are inserting your expertise in the middle between the requirements and the user. And you're taking considerations such as audience, like who's going to be using this and what's their level of comfort with data, and also just their level of exposure to what any of this is. So you could easily put together something that is technically correct and absolutely worthless. And in the same way, if you deliver exactly what someone asks for, but you haven't laid on your professional expertise, both in understanding visualization, but also the data in this particular case, you're kind of committing malpractice to a degree if you don't ask some questions and say, what do you need to use this for? Because I understand the things you've said, but if they give me an answer and I know that these aren't going to add up to help them make the decisions that they need, then I'm not doing my job.
So I do a lot of work with public health agencies like the CDC, and they're really highly educated scientists. And I was teaching this idea in a workshop recently, and one of the people raised their hands, or like a brilliant PhD epidemiologist, and they were like, "Oh, so we're supposed to be interstitial fluid." And I was like, "Wait, my ninth grade biology understanding, like what, interstitial what?" And they were like, "You're the in-between space that holds everything together." And I was like, "Yes. Bingo." That is what I want you to do. Yeah. So I don't know if you realized you were doing this in the episode or not, because like you just said, it's not like the IT professional is bad or the data professional is amazing. Like it's just different roles too, and different skill sets you bring to the table. But I think you were lightly encouraging people to be like, yeah, go ask those questions. Like that is the brilliance that you can add by having those conversations and like being a great listener, but also kind of like, some light pushback. And I do the same in my consulting. And I also teach people to do that in workshops. So I just wanted to talk through some examples that I was thinking of, but also give people a process that I hope they can follow too. So I'm going to be relying on listeners to like keep us posted, reach out to Zach and I, let me know if you try this and how it works for you. Okay. So before I get into this, let me tell you a funny message I got from a man on LinkedIn recently. That sounds like creepy. It was somebody I knew. I had met him in a workshop. He came to a workshop and he reached out on LinkedIn afterwards and he was like, "Anne, you would be so proud of me. I finally got the courage." He didn't say courage. He said BALLS. I can't say that word out loud because my 4-year-old like repeats everything. But he was like, "I finally got the courage to be a rebel, just like you taught me." And I was like, "What are you talking about? What? Tell me more." I don't teach anybody to go be a rebel. Like I'm thinking of all my slides and my handouts, my ebooks. I'm like, when did I teach you that? I taught you about like listening, communicating, like advocating, like all those cool things, like cheering you on as you do great Dataviz work. And he was like, "My boss had this very specific request and the boss asked for it." And he goes into detail. He's like, "The boss wanted like 3 charts with this time frame, with these colors and this specific chart type on these variables." And like, it was very specific. But when I listened to what the boss actually needed, I felt like that's not what they needed at all. So I just gave my boss 1 bar chart with like everything grayed out except for the 1 bar that they really cared about. And the boss was like, "This is amazing. This is exactly what we wanted and needed. Thank you so much. This is so helpful." And I was like, "Good. Like, you're not being a rebel. You're just like, I think just doing your job well, like just doing a good job." So, okay, here's what I teach people to do. And we'll see, Zach, if you've done anything similar, and we'll see if listeners, if they want to give this a try. So you listen to the request for data. And you're listening, right? Like you're nodding, you're smiling, like you're doing all your good listening skills. You're not interrupting people mid-sentence or like getting defensive. A lot of times I used to feel like people would be like, "Anne, can you do this?" And I'd be like, no, that's not possible in Excel or Tableau or whatever. Like I would just freak out mid request. Like I don't do that anymore. So you listen, you can ask some clarifying questions. You're mostly just listening and gathering information. Like, "Oh, you said you need such and such data for a meeting. Like, tell me when the meeting's happening. Who's going to be at the meeting? What types of people? How much data do they already have? Do you have a sense of, wish list topics? What might they need? What might you need?" And you're kind of just like listening and brainstorming. And then you come up with 3 ideas. I used to call these makeovers. I would tell people like, come up with 3 makeovers. Maybe you have the original. It's like the original could be like a terrible chart that needs to be revamped. Or the original could be a table of data. It hasn't even been turned into a chart yet, or it's like a raw spreadsheet or something. So like I used to call it makeovers. I don't anymore because I think that connotation suggests that something's like terrible and broken, which may be the case, but not always. And then of your 3 ideas, idea 1 is very similar to the original or the request for data. Idea number 2 is a little bit different, just a little bit different. And idea 3 is very different. Idea 3 is usually the winner. Idea 3 is usually what people actually need, but like you're kind of slowly 1% at a time, like getting them more comfortable with that. So an example. So Zach and I said we're recording this at what, like 8:30, 9:30 at night. So a million hours ago at 1 p.m. today, I was doing a virtual workshop with a client. And how can I say like what they did without telling you who they are? It's a transportation agency in a major city. So they run like the buses, you know, the subway system. They run this for a big city. So they have lots and lots of data. And we were looking at one of their charts on revenue sources. So their original chart, not the one that needed a makeover, it wasn't necessarily totally broken, just the original that we were trying to get ideas for, was a pie chart with like 7 or 8 slices on all the places their money came from. So it was things like the certain tax program from the city, passengers paying for tickets, parking in parking garages, a few other things, like the 7 or 8 slices. And it was also 3D. So, you know, people listening in the data community, you're probably already like, how many slices did that pie chart have? What? And like, if that's not like maybe making people cringe enough, like it was also 3D. And then it also had one of my favorite things, just kidding, was it had a separate legend on the side so that people would have to zigzag their eyes back and forth and be like, okay, wait, this blue slice is like this, and this purple thing is this, and this. It was just like, you know, we needed to revamp it a little bit, and they knew that too. That's why they were like, hey, let's do this in the workshop together. So we're coming up with 3 ideas together, and idea 1 I mentioned should be pretty close to the original. So if we started with a 7 or 8 slice pie chart, that's 3D with a separate legend that's really time consuming to read. Idea 1 was still a pie chart. I am not in the anti-pie charts are evil camp. I think you can have some easy to read pie charts. So what we did was we grayed out all the slices except one. We decided to focus on one revenue source, and that was like a dark color. So it's kind of like a 2-slice pie chart. You know, it gives you some prioritization. So when you look at the pie chart, it's not like 7 different colors, like a circus tent that you don't even know what to look at. You're able to see just one slice. And then we added direct labels, and like 3D went to 2D, but it's still a pie chart. So it's like comfortable. You know, the accountants who made that chart aren't like, oh no, this is so different, I'm gonna freak out. They were able to be like, oh yeah, I can see like why you made these changes. Idea 2, slightly different. We turned the pie chart into a bar chart. So we just ordered those 7 slices, the 7 revenue sources from greatest to least. We still grayed out everything, made just one of the bars a darker color. And then idea 3, pretty different. We made an icon array of little icons, like 1 icon for each $1 million of their budget. So like passenger fares being one of their revenue sources that they were really interested in was, they actually had an icon from their style guide that looked like, it's like the side view of a person sitting in a seat on a public transportation system. But icon arrays are pretty different from pie charts, and that ended up being what they really needed because they wanted this kind of like overall view of the data. They had mentioned the term infographic, which infographic is tricky because it means different things to different people. But generally when I hear infographic, it means like quick wins, an overview, something not too technical, not too detailed. So I was thinking like, what gives the overview of this data? Like it's probably not the pie chart with 7 slices. It may not be the bar chart. Maybe it's this icon array. Maybe it's idea 3. So I come up with them usually in that order, like, okay, let me just tweak the original a little bit. Okay, what's the next idea I have? That's idea 2, I'll share with them. Idea 3 is probably gonna be a little bit different because I'm more advanced in my thought process at that point. But then I share all those 3 ideas back with the group. We talk about the pros and cons together so that they feel more ownership over the process that way too. And then they can say like, oh yeah, now I can see that a 3D pie chart with 7 slices and all these different colors. Yeah, I can totally see how it makes sense to change things up a little bit. Like I really like idea 2 and 3. And they'll usually, a lot of times actually people will say like, oh, idea 2 would be great for this report and idea 3 would be great for the slideshow. So they can start to think about different formats or different audiences that might benefit from each of these ideas. Have you done anything like that, Zach?
I haven't done that as explicitly. I've done that in exercises and classes I've attended. Oftentimes, it's sort of a combination of working with your essentially whatever your client is, whether that's someone internal, external, however that relationship works for you, and trying to be iterative to some degree and sort of finding their level of comfort and also data literacy. So I'm actually exploring a little bit of my thoughts on this in a journal article I'm working on right now. But one of the things I find most important in terms of constructing a data viz is your understanding of who the audience is. Like, who is this for? Because if you don't know who it's for, it has to be for everyone. And if it's for everyone, it's really for no one. It's impossible to satisfy all audiences, to sort of bridge all gaps. So part of my thesis around this comes from I am deeply nerdy. So it's a book called Understanding Comics, written by Scott McCloud in the early '90s. So Scott McCloud is a deep thinker in terms of visual literacy. So he sort of traces his thoughts on this back to like 1300 BC. You know, because people have been pictorially expressing ideas for a very long time. And a big part of the process of taking something visual and explaining it to someone is the idea of closure, in the sense that in everything you create, there's a silent partner that you have, a second creator, which is the audience. So when you're constructing your visualization, you and the audience are both pouring meaning into this, and you're not always going to be able to stand next to it, hold their hand, and explain to them exactly what it means. So in his book, for example, he uses a picture of a grocery store aisle, and it's 2-liter bottles. And you can see part of the image on each one, but you can't quite see what they are. But it's enough from your life experience to put together, oh, it's a row of Pepsi logos. I don't see a single complete Pepsi logo, but I'm able to take the incomplete thoughts here and take my knowledge of grocery stores to say that's what this is. So in the same way, when you're doing a data visualization project, people at the organization you're working with have an understanding of their organization and their data, but also in terms of just visual language in general. And the better you can understand their level of both literacy and confidence and competence in this, the better you can leverage their own creative ability that they're bringing to it to figure out what you don't need to say. So part of it is what you need to bring to it. And the other part is what can you leave out? So if you're working on some geographic data and people are wanting to know what sales look like for the United States, what's the real question they're asking? Do they really want to see all 50 states right here? They may. That might be valid. But if they're really wanting to see the winners and losers, you might be able to get away with like two stacked bar charts, or not stacked bar charts, two bar charts showing you the top 5 and bottom 5 states. That might be exactly what they need. But the temptation would be, well, I need to show them all 50. They don't need that necessarily. They know there's 50 states. You don't have to remind them of that. I mean, it might potentially help if there was some geographic component that was consistent, like if the Eastern region was always in the top or bottom. But for the most part, you can sort of leverage many of those ideas and sort of use them as a silent partner to help you get your ideas across better. And you can tell it's a partially formed idea in my own head about how this ties to Dataviz, but it's a work in progress. So,
no, I love it. And you were mentioning knowing like who your audience is. And I think, let me share another idea with you. You tell me if you've thought about this one. I feel like one of the most important things to understand about your audience, beyond just like, these are supervisors, this is the executive director, this is a general public, like not just their titles or their roles, but I think the most important distinction is whether your audience is technical or non-technical. And my very fancy definition of those is technical is, I'm going to guess you, definitely me, it's people who like data. We love data. We want to open up the data file and be like, ooh, let me find patterns today. This is so fun. I'm going to do this in work and outside of work because it's a hobby. Technical people, we like data. We're in data careers on purpose. I think that's like 1% of the population. It's a lot of our friends, probably. It's a lot of our colleagues, but I always have to remind myself, like, and just because you love data and you love decimal places and you love tables and you love nuances and you love drilling down and finding patterns, 99% of the world is non-technical. they don't like data. Data's a chore for them. They'd rather be doing something else. They're very smart. They're very highly educated. They're very hardworking, but they have a skill other than data. And that's like 99% of the groups I design dashboards and infographics and slideshows for, is like, they want to be out. I work with a lot of federal agencies. So they're the people who are like managing the budgets for these multi-million-dollar agencies. They're hiring staff. They're, just managing all these projects. They're making policy. They might be going to Congress and like testifying before Congress and sharing all the data, but they don't want to be the one like digging through the weeds of the spreadsheet. They want somebody else to do that. So I think just recognizing which one you are, if you're technical or non-technical, but then which one your audience is, and recognizing when there might be a difference, that is so, so, so critical for getting like the right chart type, the right level of detail, the right dissemination format. Like, is it a dashboard? Is it a one-pager? Is it a detailed technical report? Like, it just informs everything else about the planning process. Because, gosh, you had a good quote. I'm gonna have to re-listen to this and write down what you said. You said, like, if you design for everyone, you end up designing for no one. Like, if you try to meet everybody's needs, you end up meeting nobody's needs, is what I heard. So I fully agree with that. And I think in my line of work, I do see groups with dashboards a lot, but I also see a lot of groups with really, really long reports, what I call the dusty shelf report, where they're like, well, chapter 1 is for this audience, and then chapter 2 is for this other group, and then chapter 3 is for this other group. And you end up with like 50 million chapters and like 100 or 200 or 300 pages trying to meet everybody's needs, but it's like not fully meeting anybody's needs. So that's a tricky situation to be in for sure.
And the worst thing about many of those dusty shelf situations is a lot of people don't want to say anything, because if you speak up, it gives the impression that maybe you don't get it. Maybe you don't understand. No one wants to be the one in the room that raises their hand and says, this doesn't work for me, because no one wants to feel foolish. Even if it's not really you being foolish, it might be this thing really doesn't work, but no one wants to be the first one to do it, including oftentimes the person making a data visualization. Maybe you read some requirements, you made what those requirements said, and you're looking at this and you're not feeling super proud of it. You're looking at it saying, I think we can do better. I don't think this is going to be what they need, but I don't really want to be the one to say something. But oftentimes someone has to be the one to speak up. And that's where that is another responsibility incumbent on the analyst. It's not really a responsibility, it's a privilege. Being able to speak up is pretty awesome, because that's one of the things you're being paid for. You're not just being paid because you can make a pretty looking chart or because you can dig into the data. You're being paid because you're going to be like the Lorax here, and you're going to speak for the trees and say, if we do this, no one's going to use it. And I say that as someone that's made stuff that no one has used before. And there's nothing more painful than that as an analyst. If you made something and you go and look at the views on it, especially like if you worked with people, you took requirements, you had checkpoints along the way, and 6 months later you come back and no one's looked at it, you feel like a major failure. And no one wants that, because what you want is something that satisfies the needs that people really have. And those people want something that's answering their questions for them, so that they're not like quietly going to someone else on the side and like getting sneaky little one-time ad hoc reports to try to like, patch things up. I mean, I guarantee you half of you are thinking this right now. And if you're not, you're way better at this than I am.
So that's the beauty of being an external consultant and a trainer, is because I am paid to speak up. That is my job, to come in and like assess what's working and find very specific areas where we can make improvements. So I'm very comfortable in that role, being like, hey, tell me, I have this whole self-assessment. It's going to be a blog post soon, so I'll like post it on Twitter when it's done or something. But it's a self-assessment to think about, where are your reports, dashboards, slideshows, et cetera, like when were they actually used and what were they actually used for? To think about, like, tell me some success stories of when did this actually influence a staffing decision, a budget decision, some real life policy decision. I told you I work with a lot of public health groups. Like, when did this actually inform public health policy and like changes in communities? And it's this self-assessment of looking at 4 warning signs of like, the first one is like, you would think would be obvious, but it's so common people forget, it's a warning sign. It's like you finish your report, dashboard, whatever it is you're making, you email it off to somebody, maybe post it on a website, like you finish it and you don't get any response. It's just like there, it's out in the universe. It's attached to an email maybe, but nothing happens. Maybe you get an email that's like, thanks, I received this, but that's it. You know, it's like, it's not actually informing things. So yeah, I think just recognizing that for a lot of us, that's what we are hired for, whether you were a full-time salaried employee or whether you're a consultant or freelancer, like that is such a big opportunity for us to add value in our jobs, is to be that person to say like, hey, let's talk about this a little bit. You know, let's look at this dashboard with fresh eyes. Let's talk about what's working about it. What do we want to tweak about it to make sure it's even more useful? And like, I don't know, just being the role model for other people you work with too, of like starting that conversation is so valuable. I think a lot of us just, I don't know, it's not like we get in a rut. 2020 is a hard year. I don't want to pick on any of us too hard. You know, it's definitely been rough, but it can be so easy to just, you know, we all get in a routine and we're kind of like, oh, we did this report this month and now the next monthly report's due. And like, I'll just keep doing the same thing. And just having the bravery really to stand up and be like, I'm going to look at this with fresh eyes and make it the best it can be. Because I just have a sense that there's an opportunity to make it better.
Well, I think everyone has a data hero inside of them. And part of that is sometimes being a champion for better standards, but also maybe just being a cheerleader, because a lot of people, like we've said, aren't really data people. And one of the things you can do is remove the obstacle for them of being afraid of data. So whether that be, you know, doing things to encourage their confidence in the data through showing validations in a simple way, saying, hey, look, what we're doing here, this is accurate. Or alternatively, showing cases of friends and coworkers of theirs that have had success in using something. Nothing quite knocks down some of those barriers, like showing someone that other people have confidence in use something successfully. Because I mean, like we've said, everyone's afraid. It's your job. No one wants to look bad or dumb or cowardly for that matter, but having someone else out there to be a champion and sort of building this cohort of allies that are going to, you know, be enthusiastic and say, hey, look, I use this thing and it's working for me. That gets other people on board more than you saying it sometimes. So, you know, build your network at work and get people invested.
Yep.
So we are approaching the end of our time today, and I just want to thank you for coming on. It's been really just a real pleasure to speak with you. Like I said, I've been stalking you for a while. I've also been following your adventures. I know you got like COVID grounded. You were traveling full time for over a year or the better part of a year?
About a year. Yep, about a year exactly. We sold almost everything. The house that we lived in, I was a landlord. I had a paid off like rental house that, not on purpose. I bought a house in 2007 and like, you know what happened with that? You can't sell it. So we just rented it out for a decade. We sold our mattress from out from under us. Like I worked on my laptop on my lap for like a month with no office furniture, and then and my husband quit his job, which was a huge move. And then we packed up the kiddos. Our youngest is only 6 months. We're like flying to Africa to go teach, you know, there for a week. Like I've got all my belongings and carry-on luggage and my 6-month-old on my lap. And like part of me is thinking like, what am I doing? And then part of me is like, this is amazing. We're living our best lives. But yeah, COVID kind of put a wrench in our plans. So we're in Florida for the time being. Well, for the time being, we bought a house here. So at least a few years, maybe longer. It's been pretty nice so far.
That's really exciting. I've enjoyed watching your adventures, especially you hauling the kids around on this. And I mean, it's something that's definitely doable. I had my early Tableau trainer, Tableau Tiff, who got to see me win a Vizzy last year, which was very exciting for me. As much as winning the Vizzy, having my trainer there for it was kind of a special moment for me. But I remember, and this does not speak to her quality as a trainer. She's an amazing trainer. But one of the biggest questions I had was she told me and my buddy David that she travels full time and lives out of 4 bags in a golf bag. And so she told us that at the end of day 1 training. And when we returned to day 2 training in the morning, she asked, does anyone have any questions? All of my questions pertain to how you do that. So I was kind of fascinated by that. So I saw you living a similar adventure, and particularly like just in such an exciting time to be alive. That's the way I'm choosing to look at this. This is an exciting time. We're all going to talk about this for years to come. Sort of you being in a transitional period during all that just looked to be a relationship like this huge adventure that you're going to tell the kids about one day, and they're probably barely going to remember it all?
Well, I think my 4-year-old does remember because she'll, you know how kids make up their own languages? So she'll like speak a bunch of who knows what kid language. And I'm like, Dakota, what are you saying? And she goes, oh, I'm speaking Spanish because we were in Guatemala for a couple of weeks, right? Or she goes, or she's like scribbling and she knows all of her letters. We've been doing pre-K virtually and she's just like making up random symbols. I'm like, what are you writing? Oh, this is Japanese. I'm writing Japanese because we were in Japan for a month and a half too. So I'm like, she remembers enough. Like she can't speak Spanish or actually write Japanese, but like knowing we were there. She was at the pediatrician just yesterday and the pediatrician's like, wow, you used to travel full time. You went to like a dozen countries. What's your favorite country? And she goes, Atlanta. I was like, nice try. Nice try. We don't understand geography quite yet, but.
Well, swing and a miss, kid. But again, thank you for coming. And as we wrap up, is there anyone you'd like to shout out or anything you'd like to promote before we finish today?
Oh gosh, I was just a judge for IronViz. I got to see the top 15 entries and they were fantastic. So shout out to everybody in Tableau who organized that and everybody who submitted. I don't know how many total submissions there were, but the top 15 I got to see were outstanding. You could tell they were so thought out and so detailed. So anybody who has submitted in the past, keep doing it. And if you haven't submitted, go for it. Zach, as you know, I'm like kind of in the Tableau community, but kind of not. I'm more like software agnostic / Excel, but I was actually getting really inspired looking at these visualizations being like, oh, I should totally do this next year. But then would that be weird? Like I'm supposed to be a judge, but now I'm a submitter, but whatever. We're all trying to improve our skills. Yeah. So if you're thinking of doing IronViz, go for it. I saw really, really high quality work.
I agree. If you are thinking of IronViz, do it. That includes Anne. Thank you for all of the entries. Thank you for the 3 finalists who we'll be seeing compete in just about 2 weeks at Tableau 20-ish, which will be entirely virtual this year. 100% free. Everyone sign up and attend. You'll have a good time and you'll learn a ton. And more importantly, you'll come away fired up with new ideas for your job. Thank you for coming on, Anne. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, Zach. Bye.
Bye.